Hey, how's it going, folks? My name is Carl Choi, publisher, co founder of 24/7 Comics, and welcome to the very, very first episode of Unhinged Conversation. So, what is this? And first of all, who is this? There's a lot of names that we may recognize, and we're going to start seeing them and their presence here on the 24/7 Comics HQ. Now, I'm only a co-host today because at the end of the day, I'm a fanboy myself. I'm a very new publisher, and at the same time, I've been very fortunate to have come across amazing talent, folks in the space that really believe in our vision, what we're doing for the industry, and really give a refreshed take on everything. Now, a year ago, I met a gentleman who uh, had a huge hand in my adolescence, and probably many of you guys as well, in my comic book journey. And man, we just hit it off. And over the last year, we've been collaborating, and we're fortunate enough to make an announcement this last month that he will be joining us as our executive editor. And so, without further ado, I'd love to introduce my partner in this and the actual host of the show, Terry Kavanagh.
Hey everyone, glad to be here. Glad you guys are here.
All right, so I'm gonna do a general intro of what Unhinged Conversations is, and then I'm gonna let Terry kind of talk a little bit more about who we're talking to today, because ultimately, one of the things that and how this even came up was Terry and I was at Comics Pro together, and I was just we had such a great experience, not just on stage, but I was sharing with the team after the fact where man, like, I'm kind of the guy that runs around, network, hit shows, shake hands, make phone calls. But we always, I've always lacked is the bar scene. Like I've never been great at that, right? We've always kind of lacked coverage, and now we have like the guy who can actually cover because we synced up at some after party, and then we were kind of updating each other, and you're telling me about all these bar conversations you were having. And even for me, like a lot of times I saw you, connect with folks that you haven't seen for a long time and witness some of these conversations. And we're like, man, like people need to hear this stuff. This is like history, right? And so, yeah, that's kind of how the show came about. I mean, what are your thoughts when I brought this idea up to you?
My first thought, which I think I said to you, is you really need to trademark the name Unhinged Stories.
Yeah, exactly.
But, and I can talk about comics all day and all night. And I love talking with my friends and colleagues. So I'm happy to do this. It's going to be fun.
Yep. So in general, this format will be hosted by Terry as he invite his different friends from his long career in the comic book industry, and then myself and a few other surprise co-hosts will probably jump in throughout the season. And ultimately, what this is, it's a raw, unfiltered, deep dive into the stories behind the stories. And ultimately, in this debut episode, we're going to reunite Marvel legend Terry Kavanagh with an iconic figure that I'll let him introduce for a very candid conversation about their time in the trenches at Marvel Comics. And I think we're going to be able to cover anything from like late night deadlines to creative clashes, forgotten pitches to behind the scenes moments that never made it print. And so ultimately, you guys will not hear this conversation until now. And so there's no PR filters, no editorial oversight, just real talk between two comic book titans. So, Terry, would you mind introducing our very first guest?
Not at all. We're starting this series with my good friend and longtime colleague, Alan Davis, who I think you all know who that is. But if not, Alan was the driving force behind Excalibur. He had a lot of experience, a long time experience in comic books before coming to Marvel, working for Marvel UK, etc. Came to Marvel. I'll wait until Alan comes on.
You know what? Here goes. Let's bring Alan on. Hey.
Hey, Alan.
Hello. Good to see you again.
Yes. Been a while.
Hi,
Been a while. I'm going to say that the way Alan met, and at any point in these stories, Alan, if I'm wrong, feel free to correct me because I feel like you've done less mind-altering substances than I have over time. So you might have better memory. I was the assistant editor in Ann Nesenti's office on the X-Men line of books. That included Excalibur. and Chris Claremont was writing it. Alan was drawing it at the time. So originally we just met over the phone. Originally it was just me calling to ask Alan about deadlines. Not that that was ever a concern with Alan meeting his deadlines. It was usually to apologize for us not meeting our deadlines on our end and getting him the plots in time. I won't name names there, but I think it's pretty obvious. We would talk on the phone, mostly just about business. And then it became more personal. Eventually, Ann left staff. I was promoted to full editor, and I was the full editor on X-Men, Excalibur. Sorry. We, at that point, had developed a much more personal relationship, and our conversations could go on for hours. Am I wrong, Alan?
No, that's right. That's right. That's the first thing you've got right.
And then it went. The first time we met, would that have been at San Diego, Alan?
No.
In person? England.
New York. You came and picked us up at the airport.
Okay. All right.
In a town car. You came and picked us up.
Okay. That doesn't sound like me, but I believe you.
No, I had Heather and the kids with me.
Okay, that makes sense.
At the airport.
Yeah, because in general, New Yorkers do not pick up people from the airport. It's not a thing we do. So that was a high compliment to you.
I think you were told to.
Oh, that makes more sense.
So what was your first impression of each other? Like when you guys first saw each other, I mean, do you guys remember? Like, even if it's not, at the airport or whatnot, like your first moment in time together. And then I have another follow-up questions after that. But I would love to hear, what that first impression was like.
I honestly don't remember.
I think I remember Alan saying something to me like, "Wow, you're even better looking in person than you sound on the phone." That's how I remember it.
Is that with the droids?
No, I have no real memory of that either. Like I said, I don't remember particularly going to the airport, but I like to think I became very close with Alan and his family. Starting with that trip, I got to meet his kids when they were very young. It was their first time in the United States, I believe, maybe even out of the country for you guys.
We've been to France, but that was all.
Yeah. So I was determined to take very good care of them. And I really enjoyed them. And now I've enjoyed sort of watching his kids long distance, but watching his kids grow, have kids of their own. And it's amazing for me to remember when they were just this big and now have kids that are this big. I'm not this big. So it's been a long, long time.
So
I feel ancient now.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a while, but there's still, you guys' work had so much impact on my generation and guys like me, a lot of my friends. Would love to hear kind of just from you guys' memory what the environment was like at the time. Like with you guys were at Marvel. I mean, throughout those years, I mean, you guys were in the midst of like the rise of the Force, right? And so what was it like? And as things evolved and things got more mainstream of comics, would love to get a quick descriptor of the atmosphere.
Well, I imagine it was a different experience for Alan than it was for me. I was in the office in New York.
Yep.
Alan was freelancing long distance. He did come to New York or come to conventions and interact with us all. But for me, it is almost impossible to describe what a fun place that was to work at in those days. We had pretty much, what names do I want to name? Once Tom DeFalco became editor-in-chief, we had pretty much creative freedom. He encouraged that completely. He rarely reined us in on anything. He figured if we were excited about it and the creators were excited about it, then the audience would be as well. We were all in an industry that we had a passion for. I would say 95% of people who worked at Marvel in those days, at least in editorial, were all comic book fans growing up. We had unlimited expense accounts. So we would yeah.
Ridiculous.
We would go to lunch for hours. The theory was it was to take freelancers out and to do business. And we were always doing business. Honestly, all of the people who worked there, even when we weren't at a company paid for lunch, even if we were hanging out after work at a bar, we were talking comic books. So we were always doing business, and we would go out and we would have arguments about whether or not, Captain America would hit Spider-Man from behind, even if Captain America was possessed by Mephisto. And, these would get to be very passionate and loud arguments. And eventually the waiters and waitresses would stop coming to our table out of some kind of fear. But we just had so much fun. We were what was known as exempt employees. So we didn't have to be there from 9 to 5. If we could get the comic books out, all our comic books out, and meet our shipping deadlines by coming into work 5 hours a week, that was fine. If it took you 50 hours, then there was no overtime. But again, we all loved what we were doing so much that very few people went home at 5 o'clock. And very few of us came in at 9 a.m. for that matter. But very few of us went home at 5. We just enjoyed each other. We enjoyed what we were doing for a living. We enjoyed the freedom we were given to do that, which I just can't imagine a better creative environment or a better work environment in general. We were very spoiled by this.
Yeah, in fact, what I heard was DC was the corporate suit environment, and Marvel was like the fun rock star startup environment.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, Alan, what was your perspective like back then? What was the environment like?
Well, as Terry's already said, I started off in England working in British comics, but that was only for about 3 years, and I knew virtually nothing about comics, so it was a steep learning curve. And when I'd been on Batman and the Outsiders and then Detective, all the time I was talking to Chris Claremont, and he was trying to get me to do X-Men. And after a couple of years of rejection, he decided to try a different tack and came up with Excalibur. So it was Chris that I think was the instigator of Excalibur. And then when I started working at Marvel, I only had about 6 years of experience, and 2 years of those being valid experience. And that was with a guy called Mike Barr, who was the writer and editor on Batman and the Outsiders, and then on Detective. And just saying that anyone who knows Mike Barr, he's currently in quite a bad situation. Really good guy, but things have been bad for about 1.5 years now. So if anyone thinks of him or wants to get in touch. So do you want me to go out? Yeah. It was Chris that carried me on to trying to do something at Marvel. And I did a couple of annuals. I did 2 New Mutant annuals, an X-Men annual, and then I did 2 fill-ins on X-Men. And then it was on to Excalibur. And again, it was another steep learning curve because that was drawing comics the Marvel way, where I'd get a Chris Claremont plot. And basically, Chris gives you all the information you could ever need. And it was another big learning experience. But as Terry said, there was problems with deadlines.
Yeah.
Because I had my family, I didn't want to be working 24/7. I wanted to be able to spend time with the family, and if a script was late, it meant that instead of having to do a page a day, I was having to do 2 pages a day. It's just crazy once that starts.
So to what Alan said about learning the Marvel way, the DC style was always full script. So the artist was told, panel 1, Clark and Lois are in the Daily Planet office. Clark is on the left, Lois on the right. Clark is saying this, Lois is saying this. Panel 2, Jimmy interrupts, etc. The Marvel way was much more, I believe, collaborative and open, where the writer, Chris was particularly detailed writer, so the writer gave as much as possible to the artist, but without the dialogue. And it might be page 1 is this, page 2 to 4 is Dr. Octopus and Spider-Man fighting on a rooftop. Then Dr. Octopus smashes a water tower and drenches Spider-Man and escapes. But that gave the artist a little more creative freedom for pages 2 to 4 about how to play out that fight. Depended on the writer. Some writers were much more included much more detail, like Chris did as well. And I will say this. I love Chris. We are friends, but he will be the first to tell you, because every single convention I see him at, he comes up to my table, points and yells, "That's Terry Kavanagh. That's the guy that fired me twice off of Excalibur." And my response commonly is, that's because the first one didn't take. And it was in an attempt to, we lost Alan because of Chris being so behind on his plots. We were sort of the ugly, not ugly, but we were the stepsister to the X-Books, and his
so it wasn't in the X-Men office. It was a separate office.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes. When Ann was promoted, most of the X-Books went to Bob Harris, New Mutants, X-Men, or Uncanny X-Men. X-Men came later. But, Chris, it was always going to be X-Men and Uncanny X-Men that were his first priorities. So he squeezed us in. We lost Alan because of that, which was very sad to me. He did. I had to fire him one day. It was a Monday. I remember this. I hired someone else to do the next issue. Chris came in the next Monday with a plot for Excalibur. This is how I ended up firing him twice. And I said, "Chris, you're not the writer on Excalibur anymore. I can't, I've already got somebody working on this issue." And he immediately went to the editor-in-chief's office and said, "Terry's trying to fire me off Excalibur." And Tom DeFalco said, "Well, he's the editor of Excalibur. So if he's firing you off of Excalibur, you're off of Excalibur," which really surprised Chris. We've gotten past it. And I think he understands why I did it. Then, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Alan, I called you and I said, "I'd like you to come back on Excalibur." And you responded by saying, "Well, I'm not really sure I want to revisit that again. And who would be the writer?" And I'm like, No, you don't understand, Alan. I'm asking you to write and draw it. And you were a little befuddled by that and said, "Well, how do you even know I can write?" And the fact was that I used to go to Ireland to visit my family every summer when I was younger, and I would pick up a lot of the British comic books there. And Alan had taken over writing on quite a number of one or two different series that I remember that I loved, that introduced the Warpies and all that kind of stuff. And I wanted to see that come back into Marvel full time. So he did take me up on that offer. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that's true. There's one. I suppose this is one of your bar stories.
There we go. Bar story time. So I'm gonna give some visual here, Alan, as supporting, so you could kind of get some as you tell your story. But let's get into it.
Well, this is when I went back. It was issue 42, I think. I said to Terry, "I'll only do it if you can give me a good head start. I want at least 3 issues ahead." And Terry did that. And I was able to do a book a month, which I didn't think I was going to be able to do, writing and penciling a book a month, but I was able to do it. But then when Terry had 3 issues finished in the drawer, editorial, I'm assuming Tom DeFalco, came in and said, "What are these 3 issues doing here? This is money. This should be getting printed." So it was put on the summer schedule, which meant there was 2 issues coming out per month. So I was immediately a month behind, from being 3 months ahead to being a month behind. So that's deadline hell.
The fun of corporate comics.
So what happened there then? Like, what was the pivot, Terry? Like when a situation like that happens, what were the conversations like between you two to get things in order?
Well, I'm expecting, I don't really remember directly, but I'm expecting Alan understood that I wouldn't have done that by choice. That it was also a compliment to him. Like, we wanted to get more of that material out faster. And I just loved what he was doing on that. And Alan is far and away the most professional comic book person I've ever worked with. I never had to bug Alan about deadlines. If I asked Alan for a change, it was inevitably only based on the fact that something contradictory had happened to that plot point in another title, because there was nothing that I needed to that I needed to do to impact Alan's storytelling. He knew exactly what he was doing. His pacing was beautiful. The creativity was all in. So if I had asked for a change, it had nothing to do with him. It had to do with some outside influences or something happening to that one of those characters in a different book. He accommodated easily. Easiest person I've ever worked with in comic books by far.
Okay. I have a question. I mean, Alan, this is for you. So I've been working with creatives most of my life, from a talent manager to a producer to now a publisher. I've been working now in comics for about 5 years, so I'm still relatively new. But and my style is more about putting good people together and just letting them riff, and then collaborating ideas and really being a supporting role, right? And that's why Terry and I get along. Like, we kind of think very similarly. Now, when I think about the Marvel way, though, is obviously, like, I've worked in film, I've worked in events and whatnot. The writer typically come up with like a very clear screenplay. It's kind of like how the movie side, we don't really move until the screenplay is locked. But with Marvel ways, I think it was a really smart way to move things forward. But when you went from kind of working on Batman and then moving to the Marvel way, did it ever cross your mind, like, hey man, I'm actually writing this now because they're just giving me an outline, like, and so I'm always kind of curious, like, what was that mentality like? Where then obviously evolved to Terry trusting you with the IP, and obviously Terry knew like you're already contributing that way. So what went through your mind at the time? Do you remember at all, as far as like something?
Well, when I first started, I was intimidated about working with Chris Claremont because it was Chris Claremont, and so it took me, I think, 3 issues before I felt comfortable. I had to figure out how to work because Chris has so many ideas and so much depth of characters that you have to select certain pieces to put on the page. There's some writers that it's difficult to fill a page because the pages are so vacuous, but Chris always had too much stuff, if anything. So you had to be selective and you'd move things around. But even then, you still stuck to Chris's story. He'd still got it worked out. So it wasn't really like I was coming up with a story. It was just coming up with a presentation of the story, how the story was paced.
Okay. Any thoughts on that, Terry, as far as like when it comes to the artist writing with a writer and just the way?
That's very true. About Chris specifically, not true, and also what Alan said, not true of all artists, or I'm sorry, all writers. I had the advantage. I was the editor of Marvel Comics Presents for 5 years, which was an anthology title, came out twice a month with 4 stories per issue. So I was dealing with 8 creative teams a month on that one book. And the book, I loved doing the book, but it almost killed me as well for obvious reasons. But what I was able to do with that book was, if I had a new writer like Scott Lobdell, I could team him with a really experienced penciler like Don Heck, let's say, and put them together, because I knew where Scott missed something or I missed something or left a hole in the story, Don Heck would be able to pick up and be able to correct. It wasn't always the case, but more often than not. And I could do vice versa as well. I could take a really experienced writer and try out a new penciler on them, knowing that that experienced writer was going to call for the establishing shot that was needed, etc. And if there was some gap in the penciler's experience or ability, that could be picked up. I mean, an example of that was I was editing for Marvel Comics Presents Don McGregor and Gene Colan on a Black Panther serial that ran about 26 issues, actually. And at one point, Don called me and asked for an extra page. And I said, Don, I really can't. All the other, stories that I have in the drawer are 8 pages. And I'd need a 7-page story to sort of make up for that. And he really was desperate for that extra page. And he said, I'll write you a 7-page story of any character you want. I'll do that for you. And Don was known as a verbose writer. Very, very, very talented, good writer, but he used a lot of words. So I thought, all right, I'm gonna see what I can do here. This is making my life a little more difficult. Yeah, I love Don, but let's present a challenge to him as well. So I said, Don, you can do any character you want, 7 pages, but it needs to be a silent story. And he gave me a Submariner 7-page silent story that was beautiful. And I decided this is an example of I want to use really a new talent on this, because Don has given a very, especially since he couldn't do any dialogue in it, very detailed panel breakdowns on what he wanted. And I had seen this new artist in Carl Potts's office, this up and coming guy named Jim Lee. And so I decided to put Jim Lee on that story with Don. But that was an example. That was a way for me to work out what Jim, if Jim was going to have flaws in his storytelling, I knew they would be corrected by the detailed plot. I'm pretty sure this didn't answer your question, which had more to do about did artists sometimes feel that they were writing the stories?
Oh, speaking of questions, we did get an audience question. Okay. And this is probably for both of you guys, because, obviously, in TV, often when you see a character or response, TV rooms are actually actively writing, reflecting to what the audience are. Did you guys do the same? I mean, maybe I'll go to Alan first. Did the popularity of a character influence the storyline? Did that ever happen, Excalibur, when one character was so popular that you put more time into them?
I don't think so. I think back then the fan mail was really far behind the main story. It was maybe like 5 months before you got any fan mail. It was, pre-internet, so it was all done by proper letters, hard copies.
My experience spoke to if a creator loved a character, that influenced the storyline. That made that direction go. But that had more to do with the creator's interest in that character or ideas of how they could build that character and what they could do with that character. From a writer's standpoint, that was my experience. From an editorial standpoint, yes, certainly at a certain point in Marvel Comics Presents, we launched with Wolverine as the first 8-part lead feature. Then we did Cyclops, we did Colossus, we did, a bunch of other characters. Sales dipped when it wasn't Wolverine. And then eventually Tom DeFalco came to me and said, we need Wolverine as the lead feature moving forward all the time. Then at one point, I also did a Ghost Rider serial in there, and that impacted very positively the sales on the book. So eventually he came to me and said, all right, we're going to make it a flip book, and we're going to do Wolverine as the lead feature on one side and Ghost Rider as the lead feature on the other side. Mainly so we could have 2 covers on the stands that showed 2 very popular selling characters. That impacted my ability to really play with it like an anthology the way I'd like to do up to that point, where I'd like to intersperse superhero stories with science fiction, with horror, etc., rather than just do 4 superhero stories. So that was an example of, yes, the popularity of those characters, really the sales figures of those characters impacted what stories we were telling.
Okay, makes sense. I mean, okay, so a follow-up to characters then. Was there a character that you always wanted Alan to draw, but he never got to it? And then Alan, was there a character that you always wanted to draw that you wish Terry would have gave you a chance to draw? That never happened.
My experience, no, and I'm going to answer for Alan, even though he might disagree. I don't think that was true for Alan either, because he had complete creative freedom on Excalibur. If he felt like drawing Jack of Hearts, he could have put Jack of Hearts in the plot. The only thing that might have interfered with that is me taking it to whatever editor was in charge of Jack of Hearts and them saying, no, we're killing him this month or whatever. But my experience, there was no particular character I wanted to see Alan. I take that back. I wanted to see him do the Warpies. I wanted to see him do those characters from the Marvel UK comic books that I had loved when I was younger. And he did them.
Nice.
Alan, was there anyone?
Not really, no. I can't think of anything, related to Excalibur. The only character that I did want to do was John Carter. And Bob Harris had asked me what I want to do. He said he would get John Carter, but then found out that Dark Horse was doing a crossover with Tarzan at the time. So he said, why don't you do Killraven, which is another guy with a sword killing Martians, you know?
Yes.
Nice.
Yes.
So that was how the Killraven project came to be.
That I didn't know that Bob had sort of pitched that to you. That's a good idea. And you also did for Excalibur at least one cover that was a sort of tribute to that, with Nightcrawler holding up his sword, with a beautiful damsel wrapped around.
Yeah, it was based on the Frazetta cover for John Carter.
Yeah,
I love it. Okay, so let's go into covers. I mean, I'll share your website, Alan. Here's a lot of your covers gallery. What are these here your favorites?
No, I think that might be all of them that I did.
Oh, it's all of them. Okay. Is there any favorites looking at these?
Well, there is a story. There's a progression from the first three covers.
Okay.
I was asked to do humor on the cover, which was at the time bizarre to have humor in a superhero comic that blatantly. The one that you're showing just at the moment, the issue 3. Yeah. That was the one where everyone says that's the way we want the humor, something that like sight gag, a one panel sight gag. And so that became the target for the rest of the series. The one that comes after that, issue 4, which was the janitor working on the cover, that one, Tom DeFalco told me caused a real stink with Stan Lee, that Tom thought he was going to get fired.
Oh no.
Because he said how ridiculous a cover it was. Tom thought it might be Assistant Editors Month or something like that. But then when it turned out that Stan Lee told Tom DeFalco that he read this comic just to find out what sort of ridiculous was going on, and he never read Captain America, Thor, and Fantastic Four, which were always his first read when he got the pile. So Stan Lee, this is according to Tom DeFalco, read that before the other 3 for the first time ever. And so Terry was told from then on, whatever he wants to do, let him do it. So the covers were always great fun for me because it was just do anything that I thought was silly.
Any Office backstories to piggyback off of, Terry? Do you remember?
I can speak exactly to Stan Lee's opinion about that issue because he wrote me a letter at which I have proudly framed on my wall in a different house, saying that it was a perfect comic book and one of the best, if not the best comic book he had read that year from Marvel or any other publisher.
Wow. Oh,
and
that's great.
It's funny to think, I only knew the story Alan told from Alan. Tom DeFalco, I don't remember ever saying that to me. From Alan telling me that. It's so funny to think that Stan went from this is stupid to this is the greatest thing ever.
That's awesome. What a great letter. We have to check it out next time.
Yes, definitely.
Get a visual of that. What else? So how about this one, Alan? When obviously there's the number 1 issue. Was there
that was it. They wanted a group shot looking heroic. And then it's, where's the humor? So the werewolves were added in afterwards as an afterthought. So it wasn't really very funny, but we didn't know what we were aiming for at that time, and we were making it up as we went along.
Yeah. And Alan, I've seen a different colored version of this.
There's many versions. There's many versions of this.
Yeah. Yep. And I would like to say that thanks to the generosity of Alan Davis, I am the proud owner of the original art on this cover.
Yes, you are. I've seen it. It's beautiful.
And along with, I think it was issue 52, Alan, that was an homage to that with them as dinosaurs. No, that's the other one we just talked about.
The one we talked about earlier? Where's the dinosaur one?
It's another page. You've got another page to go to.
Let's see. Do I go to the... next. There we go. Boom.
No, the next one after that.
Next one. Oh, so many. Oh, my gosh.
Wow.
So much nostalgia.
So would it be issue 52, Alan? Does that sound right?
Previous. I don't see.
Here
it is. That's it.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, that's it.
Oh my goodness, I totally remember this. So what happened here? What was the whole premise of this? I forgot. It's been a while. And what made you guys decide to go so unhinged with this one?
It was an alternate reality.
Yeah, this title, Excalibur, is honestly the title that I had the least to do with editing, because just Alan was writing it, he was drawing it, and there was nothing I could have contributed to it except, like you referred to earlier about your experience, Carl. I always felt my job as an editor was to be a shepherd to the characters and be a butler to the creators. Do whatever I could. If I could have made lunch for Alan every day to save him time on getting work done, I would have done that. I mean, that's what I felt my job was. Not all editors felt that way. Many of them would hire someone to execute their vision for what they wanted for that title for the next 6 months or a year. I always felt that was problematic from the ground up, because no one else is going to be able to execute your vision as well as you. And there was always going to be friction between them. And my approach was to hire talent that I really respected and loved and let them go wild where I could allow it. And then I could enjoy the pages as they came in as well. So I can't speak to what led to that storyline, because really it was all Alan.
It's awesome.
Well, actually, you were involved in it, Terry, because it was a loose end left over from a story that Chris had done in one of the earlier issues, where we had the dinosaur family appear on Earth when there was the cross-time capers that they'd walk through a dimensional portal into Earth 616. So we talked about whatever happened to that dinosaur family. So that's led to that story.
Oh, okay. Good. I'd like to think I contributed something.
There we go.
And I will speak to the cross-time caper. I had a little bit of friction from Tom DeFalco about that series, because it went on, what was like 13 or 14 issues, Alan, I think, the cross-time caper.
Yeah,
I thought it was
lot.
great. What's that?
There was a lot, yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was great. I loved seeing all these alternate versions of characters, etc. I think it's led to a lot of the multiverse stories that we see these days. But I do remember having I'm going to call it a discussion with Tom DeFalco. There might have been some volume involved in the discussion, but it was still a discussion. And he came to me and said, you have to put, this is part 6 of a 13-part story, or, part 6 of the cross-time caper, whatever. And I just felt that was so counterintuitive sales-wise to brag to someone that, this is issue. Why are they going to pick that up off the stands if it's part 6 of a 13-part story? All they're going to see is, well, I missed the first 5 parts, if they weren't on board all along. And we ended up compromising and just doing cross-time caper on the top to suggest it was part of a larger storyline. And that's something I'd like to say about Tom. Tom and I are good friends today, and he will tell you that he will acknowledge that we had a lot of very loud arguments, but Tom was so capable of hearing what the other side had to say and changing his mind, which was not always my experience with, job superiors.
Right.
I didn't always win my arguments with Tom by any means, and probably more often than not, he was right. But when I was right, he would see that and say, okay, you're right, do it your way. That's not a common experience with bosses.
So yeah, let's talk about that. I mean, going back to what Alan said earlier, there was no internet back then. No. So one was, Alan, were you working in New York? Were you living there for the whole time you were working on Excalibur?
No.
Like, how did you guys coordinate? There must have been mailing stuff back and forth between the UK and New York. The stuff ever get lost? I mean, it was really fun. We'd love to hear some of those stories.
Well, there was half an issue where
it was all done by FedEx, super expensive, and people would FedEx one page at a time overnight from either from Arkansas or from England. That's how we were doing everything. Plots, scripts, pencils, inks, colors, all was. I can't imagine what the FedEx bill was for Marvel in those days.
Oh
Did you ever have anything lost in the mail, Alan?
There was half an issue lost.
Of Excalibur?
Yeah, the Ghost of Braddock Manor story. I can't remember what the number it was.
Wow.
There was half the issue of pencils were lost.
Had you Xeroxed them beforehand?
Yep. And what I did was I blew them up and tightened the pencils up a bit, and Mark Farmer cleaned them up to make them look like they were inked.
Okay. Yeah. So it was in the pencil stage they were lost.
Well, that's what we used to do, is send them over in pencil form.
Right.
They were lettered in New York and then sent back to get inked.
Yep. I cannot imagine what the FedEx costs were.
Gosh.
Marvel at that point. Everything changed with computers.
So with FedEx, then everyone just had a FedEx, the Marvel FedEx number.
Yes.
And you guys would just ship stuff back and forth. Did you guys ever ship anything personally? like gifts to your friends?
I do not remember ever doing that. I will say.
Did anyone that you know of actually got caught? Like, was there anyone who got caught like shipping something ridiculous to a friend or something?
Where we got impacted, not that I know of, where we got impacted is there was one editor about the unlimited expense count. There was one editor who will remain nameless, who famously went and did a business lunch every day. Whoever he took, he would take someone to lunch so they could discuss something. And then he would buy 2 meals for himself, one for lunch and then one for dinner later. He got caught, and that seriously impacted our expense counts after that.
Oh no! So the auditors
were all very pissed at this person.
Oh my gosh.
And one other mail story I have, and again, this creator will remain unnamed. I opened a package with, I think it was 8 pages of pencils from a creator, and 1,000 fleas came popping out of this package all over my office. It was horrible.
God,
it was horrible.
That sounds worse than anthrax.
It was horrible, and it made me feel bad for that creator.
Oh no!
It really did, because I just can't imagine what they were living with if that got all into this one package.
Oh no! I mean, speaking of mail, Alan, any fan mail from you that was a little funny to think about?
Not really. We always appreciated it. I think the unusual thing about Excalibur was it had a huge amount of female following, huge amount of female fan mail, which was very unusual at the time.
That's true. And we always wondered whether it was the humor or it was the fact that you had, three strong female characters on a team of 5. I mean, it was weighted towards females. But that said, I mean, Chris Claremont was known for writing strong female characters in general. So I wonder if the other X books had the same experience with having a larger female audience.
It'll be interesting. I'm curious myself.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask.
Even like this cover itself, it's very female friendly. Like the presence itself and. Really spoke in that way. And I remember that too. Growing up, I remember, how different the vibe felt different and unique. And I think it makes a lot more sense now that, as a grown up, understand geographically, Alan was in the UK and contributing creatively from kind of outside of America perspective, which I think is very powerful and did make it unique.
Alan, I have a question. Do you think there is a distinct difference between British humor and American humor, and that was reflected in Excalibur?
I don't know. People have said that to me, but I think good American humor is good and good British humor is good.
Right.
And it's how open-minded you are to the humor.
Well, I mean, I think the common consensus in America is like British humor is identified by Monty Python, something
Benny
like
Hill.
that. And Benny Hill, yeah.
Which in England is pulled apart.
Oh.
Benny Hill's seen as garbage, whereas Monty Python is revered.
Yeah. But Monty Python was about the absurdity of it all. And I do think that is a more English sense of humor, a willingness to embrace that absurdity more. And I like to think we played with that in Excalibur.
I don't know. I don't think I was that self-conscious about it. It was just doing something that made me think it was funny.
Okay.
All right. So real quick, we have a couple more questions from our audience. This next one is, any opinion on physical comics versus digital comics?
I can handle that first. I have gone to the dark side and I have 600 boxes in storage of actual comic books, but I have gone to the dark side and read my comics digitally for a number of reasons, not the least of which my wife is a light sleeper. So I used to have to go to the living room to read in general rather than have a bedside lamp on. And then I discovered that backlighting didn't bother her and I could read books and comic books on my iPad. I've gone to it for that reason. It also takes up a lot digital comics take up a lot less space. And I had one experience involving an Avengers issue that was drawn by Walt Simonson that literally led me to, text Walt and say the colors were so striking and strong. And, Walt has that sort of open style that you can fill in the sort of thick lines and you can fill in with colors. When I read that Avengers on my iPad, it sort of blew me away. It's like, oh, this might be an advantage to digital. And it reminded me of comics when I was a kid. Now, I don't remember who the color, I should. It's really wrong of me not to remember who the colorist was on this issue. And it might have had to do with Walt's request to take an older approach to coloring than current colorists were using at that point, which was a lot more saturated and I think dulled out a lot of the colors. But for me, that was an upside. That was the first time I saw that upside to digital comics. But I know Alan has a lot of opinions on coloring, and I don't know if they're affected by whether it's digital or paper.
I've never looked at digital comics.
Wow. Wow.
So all physical has been your thing. Okay.
Yeah, we'll have to send you a link.
I don't know. I enjoy physically drawing comics. I don't do digital comics, drawing them. And I feel the same. There's something about having a comic that's different.
Yes. But it's interesting having kids in their 20s. I look at them and they don't have like, I'm a collector. I admit this. My wife might say hoarder, but she's wrong. I'm a collector. My kids have no desire to own a physical anything. Comes to music, they're using Spotify. When it comes to, TV shows, they don't have TVs. They're streaming on whatever network they're using on their computers. It might be a generational difference of some sort where I wanted to own these things with the intent of passing them on to my children who are in for a hell of a problem when I do pass, because they'll have no interest in any of that and not know what to do. I literally went through a period recently of thinking maybe I should start, getting rid of these comics, selling them, doing something about it. And not only comics, I have a TV guide collection. I have a Playboy collection. But it's not hoarding, I swear, because they're in storage, so it's okay. And I went through, this is going to be a huge burden to my kids when I die. And then I realized my kids have been a huge burden to me, so it's only fair that.
So, I mean, that parlays into Stan's question from the audience. How important are comic stores for the comic industry?
Alan, you go first.
I think it's a bit too late to worry about that because comic stores are ceasing to exist.
Oh, no.
Sadly.
Which is a really sad thing because for me, comic book stores were a place to mingle with other comic book fans. You know, most of the kids in my neighborhood when I was in grammar school didn't particularly care about comics. We didn't have any. I grew up in Queens, New York. We didn't have any comic book stores, but at that time, new comics came out on Tuesdays, and you could find all of the comic book fans in the neighborhood at the local candy store on Tuesdays at lunchtime. And then the owners were an elderly couple, and they knew how excited the four of us would be. We would come from 4 different schools. We'd meet there. We'd talk about comics. They'd let us open up the packages ourselves and pick the best copies that were in any given comic. And then in high school, I went to high school in Manhattan, and there was a comic book store about 3 blocks away. And that's how I got to know many of the other comic book fans in my high school. They weren't necessarily in my class. By the time you get to high school, you're sort of starting to notice girls, and you're not maybe talking about comic books as much out loud because of where that will position you in the hierarchy of high school. But then we'd all be at the comic book store on Tuesdays when comics came out, and everybody would chat. And that's how you knew which kids in your school, not only in your grade, but in your whole school, were also comic book fans that you could freely talk to about comic books.
Yeah. So, Alan, did you have a similar impact on how comic book stores impacted your career?
I think it was pretty solitary, a solitary hobby. My brothers were interested in comics, but outside of that, I didn't have any contact with other comic readers.
Okay, so you're just like in a studio putting work out.
Oh no, I'm on about when I was younger. You know, when I was first getting comics. My dad would read comics. My brothers, two of my brothers would read comics. But no, it wasn't a community thing at all.
Oh wow! How about during your career?
Oh, it changed significantly because I even went to comic conventions. I never went to a convention until when I first took some samples to show to an editor. That was the first time I'd ever been to a convention.
Okay. So, I mean...
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I just kind of got a little idea of a question, too, because, Terry, it seemed like you and Alan had such a great working relationship. You know, obviously you trusted him to do the best work possible and tell the stories that he wants to tell. But Alan, did you ever like sneak anything into the art or story that maybe Terry didn't catch till after print? Like, was there anything that happened where you're like, oh shoot, like I got this in there, and then Terry was like, what? How'd you get this past me? Like any stories that?
I don't think so. No.
I don't think Alan would operate that way. There are plenty of people that would, but wait, I want to just go back to your first convention, Alan, when you brought pages to show. This, I assume, was in England. Was it in London?
Yeah, it was the first convention they'd had for quite a few years, and I'd been doing some work for a fanzine, and they said, "Why don't you go and show your work for Marvel UK? They're looking for someone to do comics." And it was when I met Paul Neary, who obviously was my first editor, my first mentor, and we ended up being colleagues working as pencil and inker. That was the first time I met him at that convention, and what I was offered was Captain Britain.
Yeah,
and it was basically because Marvel UK had no money, so they were looking for someone that had worked for peanuts. I was quite happy to do that.
I think a lot of comic book companies are operating that way these days. Okay, but about that convention, I have a strange question for you. Did you ever smoke cigarettes?
No.
I didn't think so, because I was at lunch with someone a couple of days ago who has a good friend and it's someone you know that I was at lunch with. It was Steve Saffel, who says hello, by the way. He has a good friend who told him that the first time they met Alan Davis was at a convention in London, and he was chain smoking. And immediately I said, no, that's not Alan. And Steve said the same thing to his friend. And then they said, and they asked Alan Davis for an autograph, and Alan said, buzz off, I'm on my break. And I'm like, none of that sounds like that could have been Alan.
I don't know, the second one might be true.
My assumption was They were somehow confusing you with Alan Moore. That was my
quite
possibly.
possibly.
Does that happen? I mean, yeah, both from the UK, and I think a lot of Americans don't leave the country. So does that ever get mixed up between you guys?
I don't know. You've got to be pretty dim-witted to mix me up with Alan Moore.
How about signatures? Like, what's the weirdest thing you've ever had to sign?
Oh,
someone's tattoo, so they could get my signature tattooed.
Oh wow!
What?
Cool.
Yeah, someone who had a Captain Britain. They wanted me to sign it so that they could have the signature tattooed
That's
onto the drawing.
Super cool idea.
Where was it on the body?
On the leg.
Okay, wow.
Male or female?
Male. He had pretty handsome calves.
And they better by your signature, I'm sure.
I don't know. I've seen quite a few tattoos. Some have been very extensive.
Wow.
It's not something I'd be interested in doing. I don't encourage it.
I can't tell you. I'm often sitting at a table next to Howard Mackey at conventions because we're very good friends, and he wrote Ghost Rider for years. I cannot tell you how many big, burly, hairy guys will come up to him with tears, forming in their eyes, tears starting to form, saying, and then they'll lift up their arm to show their, Ghost Rider tattoo and say, "I'm a Hell's Angel because of you." And they're tearing up. Howard never knows, say, well, sorry or what at that point. But it cracks me up every time. I swear I've seen that 30 times. These giant guys coming up, tearing up with their Hell's Angel, their Ghost Rider tattoo.
That's interesting. I mean, Alan, any stories there? I mean, you mentioned that there's like a lot of female audience. Was there any kind of wild like female fans that approach you and lifting other parts of clothing up for signature?
Well, no. I did meet a small group of the Excalibur fan club, which was all girls in San Diego. I think there was like 6 or 8 of them came along together. So
were they very excited to meet you?
They weren't really that way. They were just on about the characters. They weren't interested in what I did. Yeah. It was strange that they were just talking about what was going to happen to Kitty or Megan, or they liked something that happened to Kitty or Megan. They didn't really look on me as being the creator. It was almost like I was the go-between between them and the characters.
Yeah. They were giving you suggestions probably for what should happen to Kitty and Megan.
I don't know. I don't think it was that way. It was just very, very enthusiastic.
That's sweet.
And then was there ever stories you guys were exploring in Excalibur that, obviously we talked about the Stan Lee story. Was there any other moments in you guys' working relationship that you guys remembered kind of the powers to be chiming in?
I had to go through a lot that Alan, and I tried to shield Alan from a lot because as much as Kitty and Nightcrawler were our characters in Excalibur, there was a proprietary expectation on Bob Harris and the X-Men's office.
Shared.
That, those were really X-Men and they should have some say in this. So I often had to have some spirited discussions with Bob about it. But again, and I understood Bob's point. Bob and I also very good friends. I don't mean to say anything negative about him. And I had to go through that with him a lot on the Wolverine lead feature in Marvel Comics Presents, especially on Weapon X when we got to that. And I understood Bob's point. But again, Tom DeFalco, if it came to a disagreement between Bob and I, and we needed someone else to solve this, really we didn't need someone else to solve it because I could do it. I could do what we wanted with Nightcrawler and Kitty at least. And the others, he had no argument about and Rachel. I'm sorry. There was constant friction about that. But Tom DeFalco was always defensive, saying those characters belong to Excalibur. So what that editor decides is what goes. Do you remember any?
Yeah, I might have to.
No, I was aware of the fact that they didn't like it that we weren't available for crossovers during the cross time caper.
Right.
Because they were very big on wanting crossovers.
Yes. And I don't even know if that was driven by the X-Men office or by the executive editor or editor-in-chief.
Yeah, man, so many memories. I mean, I would love to have Bob Harris on the show, and you, Terry, you and Bob kind of hash out some of these old conversations that Alan
I'll
was
talk to
feeling
Bob,
from.
but I think Bob's trying to put his comic book life behind him.
We're talking about the past, so it's great. It kind of works out.
I'll talk to Bob about it. I floated it to him, and he never really answered. So
no, I mean, I'll say this, guys. Like from this conversation, Alan, first of all, thanks for your time. Terry, just for me, kind of doubled down as to what a great editor you were in supporting Alan in that way, shielding him from all that, and I feel like that also informs a lot of why you guys had a great relationship. So I think we're winding down the show. Any other kind of last minute moments and like quirks about each other you guys would love to share? Like funny memories. How about one funny memory from each of you guys? I think it'd be great. Just
all right, Al, you go
moment.
first. Well, I try to figure out how to be funny.
Funny moment.
Well, there was that night in San Diego when we were on the little balcony having dinner, and they started the fireworks display.
Yes. It was a very romantic moment between Alan and I. It was just he and I having dinner. They set up those fireworks for us. In the scene in a movie, you would have known what was going to happen next.
It was a little balcony with just one table, and we were sitting outside on our own. And there was a guy singing below us because we were like 2 stories up. And then they started the fireworks display, and it's wasted.
I thought I was pretty sure he was going to propose. But it didn't happen.
That's so cool. What were you guys eating? Do you remember?
I have no idea.
That restaurant, the Fish House or something, the Harbor House, was it?
Harbor House.
I don't. I have no. You have a way better memory than me.
I've been there.
Clean living, Terry. Clean living.
Well, there's a lot of stuff I don't want to remember, Alan. So the clean living wouldn't work for me at all.
And according to that fan that you talked to, Terry, was Alan may have been chain smoking, and you were maybe on your fifth drink, and maybe Alan did propose.
Maybe he did. I forgot. Well, Alan was instrumental in he was a few years ahead of me in his married life and kids, etc. So when, I started talking about marriage, I got a lot of good advice from Alan and about kids and about my fears of having kids. It was very helpful. Alan was sort of a therapist for me in a lot of ways about diving down a more permanent relationship path.
This is true.
Yes, it is true.
Oh wow! So Terry basically was a adventure boy then.
Okay.
Settled down.
Okay. But he helped me get comfortable with things I was innately uncomfortable with. It worked. So I blame you for my children, Alan.
You're welcome.
Do you remember, Alan, like what are some of the things that topics that you guys covered that you were able to help steer Terry towards the right path?
Well, the thing is that I was always very focused on the family first. And when I first went to America, I think Bob Harris told you that if I was to be invited anywhere, the family had to come as well. Mm-hmm. So it was like an editorial edict. And Terry always made sure of that. The first time I went to New York, you found a family-friendly hotel, which wasn't far from Marvel, and it was near various places that we might need. And so, it was always very thoughtful, very good. And as well as that, Hollis, Terry's wife, had a party at their apartment for us to introduce us to lots of the local creators.
Yes.
So it was all good.
That's cool. Man, thank you guys so much for this totally unhinged conversation covering some of the topics. I think, it's just great seeing the beautiful relationship you guys had. And, I wish for kind of the same with a lot of the creators I get to work with through the course of 24/7 Comics, and it's great to have someone like Terry kind of model for me as well. And Alan, thank you for everything you contributed to the comic book industry and all the stories you've told. And with that said, we're gonna wrap up the show, our first Unhinged conversation. But to me, it was actually very heartwarming as well. So also from the audience, thanks guys. Really appreciate everyone's time.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
With that said, we'll see you guys at the next Unhinged Stories, folks. And thanks again for Alan. Terry, please stay on as we upload.